Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the Boston series, 18 parishes in the southeastern corner of Lincolnshire with a windmill and vegetable type theme. Let's get cracking and see one. Welcome back to Boston, everybody, for parish number 4 out of 18. Now, if you've never been to Boston before, you may notice when you come out into the countryside, there's a certain aroma on the air. And what you can smell isn't nasty, oh no, it's a nice smell. And you can smell all the vegetables that are being grown in the fields around all these pretty little villages. And this particular village has a big link to a world famous market, and that would be London's Borough Market, which we have been to on the channel. Its name is Bennington. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like, and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Bennington, Beonna's farm. Hello again, Boston. This week we continue to come down the A52 into the town, and in doing so we pass through the lovely little village of Bennington. Located on a bend in the A52, this village takes its name from an 8th century East Anglian king, Benna or Beonna. He was notable for being the first East Anglian king whose coinage included both the ruler's name and title. The end date of Beonna's reign is not known, but may have been around 760 AD. Other than that, little is known of his life or his reign, but before he shuffled off this mortal coil, he must have had some connection with Bennington. Today, aside from the village's name, Bennington also has a major landmark which remembers the once king of these fenlands. That would be the old Church of All Saints, declared redundant 2 decades ago. Named the Beonna, it's a very well-respected and well-used community venue, and the focal point of this marshland village. However, don't be fooled into thinking that's all Bennington is famed for. To both the north and the south of the main village, there are arable fields with vegetables in them. In this part of Boston, some of the stuff that's grown ends up in our capital city. London's Borough Market and several others across the city are supplied by Ted's Veg. Let's go and find him, shall we? After driving almost to the East Lindsey border at the end of the Leverton episode, I made my way into Bennington via Lowfields Road. This has some very interesting businesses on it. Bell Brothers Nursery on the right hand side is one of them. Founded by Bernard Bell in the 1960s, they produce bedding plants today, but originally they focused on tomatoes and brassica. It's one of the largest garden centres around here now. As we know, vegetable production is rather prevalent out here. If you go a bit further along the road, you'll come to a business that grows it here before selling it at a world-famous market in London. Ted's Veg is run by Ted and Kath Dawson, and they're a big name at Borough Market near London Bridge on the River Thames. They supply loads of other London markets too, over 20 of them in fact, across the capital city. So, if you live in London, the chances are you've come across the freshest and most delicious fruit and vegetables that the Boston landscape can offer. Virtually next door is T.H. Clement. They're in the same line of business because they too have been producing high quality vegetables for over 50 years. TH Clement offer the freshest range of brassicas, everything from broccoli to spring greens. A major supplier to the UK food industry, they own and manage lots of land in the Fens where several of their products are grown. In next week's episode, we'll be walking across one such field and we'll get to see firsthand the quality of their vegetables. Now we're in Bennington Village and our main walk begins on David's Lane to the east of the A52. It runs out to Bennington Sea End, a small hamlet we'll end with later. First up here we have the Admiral Nelson. Previously simply known as the Nelson Inn, it's a pub which is mentioned in records as early as 1807. That was in an auction notice in the Stamford Mercury. A lot of pubs were named after Nelson around that time. It was 2 years after his victory at Trafalgar. You can catch a bus outside the pub, 5 of them in fact. The M3, B1, B7, B41 and 57 interconnect. A very well served village. Next door is what used to be the former village school, a public elementary. This was built prior to 1841, but it was founded way back in 1704 by Richard Cowell. He left a building in his estate which was converted into a schoolroom. Over the road we have a former shop of some kind, and that stands next to the old Butcher's Arms pub. Both of these buildings would appear to be residential these days. Now, if you turn around at this point, you'll see Purrell's Almshouses, which stand next to something called the Beonna, a communal venue based inside the 13th century church of All Saints. As a church, this is built in the early English style and can seat 375 people. It was restored in 1873 and has a 14th century font. It was also expanded in the 14th century to include more aisles and chapels at its eastern end, possibly with funding from the Hanseatic Trading League. In 2001 it closed and the Diocese of Lincoln officially declared it redundant 2 years later. In 2015 the Bennington Community Heritage Trust received a grant from the National Lottery to renovate it and turn it into the community centre it is now. The Beonna is named after the 8th century king of East Anglia. Now, we would have been able to see the inside of that had there not been a wedding party on there all day today. Some of the vehicles for it are already there, so I'm not going to go and see if I can have a look. There's not much point. But certainly, if you're in the area, go and check out the Beonna. It sounds really, really good. Now, we can get through this churchyard via a public footpath, and it takes us to Bennington's. I won't say it's the only residential street it's got. It's certainly the main one. It's like a big horseshoe shape that comes off a side street that's in turn is off the A52. Let's head to that and see what that's all about. And that residential street is called Bede Crescent. Bennington's population has only slightly fluctuated in the last 200 years or so. It's always been steadily around what it is today. Bede Crescent accounts for most of the modern populace, but there are some other streets too. Aside from this, no large building developments have been added for quite some time. It was a little difficult to know which arm of this horseshoe-like street to walk down because they both run to the same road. Ultimately, I chose the northern arm, simply because it leads to our next major landmark, the playing field. Bennington Playing Field is where the local village football team, Bennington FC, play. The exact date of their formation is not certain, but it is known there was a Bennington team which was playing in the Boston Saturday Football League before the start of World War II. Bennington's original home ground was at the Bay Lodge Field at the intersection of the A52 and this road, Hall Lane. In the 1950s and 60s, they had to rely on the goodwill of local farmers for a while who provided grass fields, but now their permanent home faces Bede Crescent. Here's the other end of that street, by the way, just so we don't miss it out. Now, speaking of farmers' fields, at this point you're surrounded by them. Hall Lane only has houses on one side, meaning that away to your right is an expanse of flat open fenland, characteristic of Boston Borough. There is an opening in the other direction, but next to this there's a massive house called Bay Hall. Partly obscured by trees, it's Grade 2 listed and dates from around 1700. It's made of Flemish Bond red brick. By 1994 it's become derelict and planning permission was sought for its demolition. Fortunately, it was saved, restored, and remains a huge Bennington landmark today. I don't know whether it's just because I'm a Lincolnshire boy, but there is something rather special about seeing fields of crops for me. I come from a farming background, and although most of my life has been spent in West Lindsey, which again is an agricultural part of Lincolnshire, Boston still feels very much like home to me, and that's probably because of all the fields and the farmland that's around here. So we're nearly finished with Bennington. At this point, we're almost at the A52. You can probably hear it in the background. We're going to take a left turn onto that. It'll take us back up towards the Beonna and to where we began this video. Now, when we get to the end of the route, there is another little hamlet which is just to the east of Bennington. It's called Bennington Sea End. We're going to take a drive through that. It's very similar to the likes of Leverton Lucasgate and Leverton Outgate that we saw in the last episode. So let's get to it. At the end of the road we hit the A52, and you can see the lane did originally carry on to the other side. This is not surprising. As we mentioned back in Old Leek, this stretch of the A52 is like a modern bypass, built to provide a fast link between Skegness and Boston, and it's been straightened and amended several times. There are a couple of houses on it at this point, but they're nothing greatly special. It has to be noted that walking this particular stretch is really difficult. You're much better off using Butterwick Road, which joins Hall Lane south of the A52. Here's a quick look up there. The remainder of this section brings us back to the Beonna via more arable fields and open fenland. It's not flat and boring to me, folks. I love to see this. As we re-enter civilization, we pass Willow Trees. It's a campsite which accepts caravans, motorhomes and usually tents as well. There are no electric hookups though. Following that, it's a run of houses. These are some of the oldest in Bennington and haven't changed in decades. An old postcard that does the rounds on the internet shows how this area used to look. Aside from the church's rebranding, it looks almost the same. We return to David's Lane, and our last landmark is the rather forlorn looking old village hall, no longer in use. Now that the Beonna exists, the chances of this single story building constructed from timber cladding returning to use anytime soon are quite low. There have been calls for it to be demolished or turned into a pair of dwellings. If the latter were to happen, it would join the ranks of the existing houses on David's Lane. This runs off into the countryside, but as mentioned earlier, there's still more to see up here. Let's hop in the motor and see what life's like in Bennington Sea End. Much like all the others we've covered thus far, Bennington abuts the North Sea. It was much closer to the sea centuries ago, but we already know that, of course, after what we learned in Leverton. Bennington Sea End, which is a long strung-out settlement similar to Leverton Lucasgate and Outgate, would have been underwater before the various sea banks were constructed and land was reclaimed. I'd imagine T.H. Clement have a fair few fields out here. Now, this was supposed to be a continuous drive back onto the A52, but halfway down I was stopped by a rather distressed looking man who'd lost his dog. The canine in question had escaped and run off down this lane. I was to find him about a mile away, so I halted recording and returned him to his very appreciative owner. Yes, it sort of made a mess of my final filming stretch, but I felt like a bit of a local hero, even if the dog did leave some mucky paw prints in my back seat. That's a nice tale to finish with though, isn't it? Now, next week we'll be hitting a much larger village, one with a much more suburban-like feel, as we continually work our way westwards towards Boston town itself. See you later. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.